You're listening to Head Voice, bringing you inside the minds of the best in contemporary acapella. I'm Evan, and thank you for joining us on episode 10 of Head Voice. This week, Alex Green is on the show. Alex Koutsoukas was on in episode 3, but we're finally completing the Plaid Productions puzzle, as Alex Green is the other half of the team. He's a recording engineer, producer, and arranger, and is involved in many facets of the acapella scene, including education coordinator at Boss. One quick thing before we get into it: if you're enjoying the podcast so far, it would help us out so much to share an episode with someone who you think would like it, or review us on iTunes. And we're always welcome to suggestions or potential improvements to the show, so don't hesitate to message us on Facebook at facebook.com/headvoicepodcast. All right, that's enough of that. Now here's Alex Green on episode 10 of Head Voice. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of Head Voice. We're joined today by the wonderful Alex Green of Plaid Productions. We're just going to get right into it. So the first question that I have is, when you're in college, you develop this passion for acapella, and then graduation time comes and, you're studying whatever you're studying, even if it's music, as you have, the real world hits and you got to find a job, and then you have all this energy for this thing, and then you don't know what to do with it. But in your case, you, right out of college, joined the professional group Overboard, based here in Boston.
Yes, I did.
And then after that, you went on to Plaid Productions. So I just wanted to get your takes on, transitioning from the collegiate life doing acapella to, the adult world, and how you do that.
Yeah, sure. So part of how it happened in college was, like you said, I developed a passion for it. I had always been sort of into just music in general. I was in bands in high school, continued finding my musical outlet in college. And then as I was getting closer to graduation, this was around, February or March, Overboard was doing this show at a church in Harvard Square. It was with a bunch of other local groups, and they needed someone to run sound. So I, with my meager experience, but knowing that all the gear that I would need was there, just decided to email them and be like, hey, I could do this, I guess. At the same time, they had just come out with Help, which was the big Beatles concept album a few months prior to that, like right at the end of 2009. I thought it was like the coolest thing ever at the time, because it was and still is. I found Overboard through that, was following them for a little while. They had this like summer intern, but also maybe permanent member program that they were doing, where they just needed people to be around to sub whenever necessary over the summer, because a couple of their guys were in Hyena Sound, had other summer jobs they had to do, and they needed subs every so often or regularly. So I auditioned for that early because I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do after graduating. But then it turned out that as I was looking at other stuff, like, do I want to go to grad school? Do I want to get a job in my other major, which was archaeology, and go work at a museum or go on a dig or something? Nick Gerard was like, so everyone else was going to be an intern, but we want to offer you a permanent position. And I was like, great, cool, don't have to worry about jobs at all. And it also so happened that I was like, this is great. I have a job. I have somewhere to live. I have a musical and creative outlet all at the same time. And it really wasn't so much of a hard choice as this is being presented to me and this is awesome. And this is totally what I want to do. Yeah. So Overboard just kind of organically happened. It wasn't necessarily something I was like, I need to do this, so much as like, I knew that music was something that I wanted to do, and I pursued whatever would get me there. And it just sort of happened that this was like the opportunity that was right in front of me that I just grabbed at.
Awesome. And then after you joined Overboard, not soon long after, you decided to start Plaid Productions. So I guess my next question is what was it like in the starting stages of bringing Plaid Productions to life, and what were some of the challenges you and your co-partner, Alex, had to go through and had to manage?
Well, our first problem was getting through all of the ways to name our company that were Alex puns, and we got past that real quick. Luckily, we didn't go with A Squared because that ended up being a group that we invited to Boss 4 years later. So Plaid Productions essentially started in a Chipotle. I was living in Middleton, Massachusetts at the time, and Coots, his name is Alexander Katsukis, but I'm green, he's Coots. It's easier that way for everybody. So Coots was living in Somerville at the time, right outside of Davis Square. I came by a lot. We decided to go get lunch at Chipotle, and it turned out that we were both sort of thinking the same thing, like, so do you want to make some music as a job? And that just kind of came out between the two of us. We talked it over. We're like, yep, this is a cool idea. He was working in his dad's woodworking shop at the time, building like lab furniture and cabinets. And I was in Overboard, but honestly, we weren't touring as much as I was expecting, and we were doing a lot more like basic busking work and not the Beatles stuff that I kind of signed on for. So I was like, all right, cool, let's go do this other thing where I have more of like a personal creative outlet again, was sort of what I was chasing after there. So when we first started, we had exactly 0 clients. Coots had done some editing work for Ed Boyer and for the Bubs a few months before, working on the Glee stuff, because that was right around the time where the Warblers were big on Glee. And they sort of got fire sailed into, or really more like press ganged into working on that. And I had been working on the Mates album that was about to come out. We were just finishing it up from that prior school year when I graduated. And also doing some post-production work for Mike Boxer here in New York, Dave Sprindio down in North Carolina. So those were really our first clients, were Dio, who'd been working in acapella for like 15 years, the Bubs on television, and Mike Boxer. And that's where we started. Basically through word of mouth, through knowing people like Ed, like Bill Hare, who we both knew and had worked with, John Clark, who is a Mates alum and who I was working with on the Mates album, Dave Sprindio, like I said, and then by extension, Mark Hines, Nick Lyons, Tat Tong, James Cannon, everybody who was, James Gammon also, everyone who was like the engineers to go to for acapella at the time. We knew all of them. We'd met them at SoJam, at other events, and so we were just like, hey, we exist. If you have overflow work, here's some stuff we've done. We're cheap. And that worked for a little while. Our first big thing that we did was we worked on Pitch Slapped's EP. That's Berkeley Pitch Slapped. And that was in 2011. And since they were really our first client that wasn't through somebody else, we were just like, you guys are really good. This is going to be really good. We'll do it for free. And so we did. It was 5 songs. They recorded all this stuff prior to even talking to us about it, but we knew Hannah Giuliano, who was music director at the time, and so we talked with her and their like in-house recording engineer and bass named Derek, and just sort of came to an agreement that, yeah, we should work on this, because when they were working with like student engineers at Berkeley, they were all used to working on instrumental music, and the idea of like sampling vocal percussion was completely foreign to them. So whenever Tracy, who is a great vocal percussionist, Tracy Robertson, who is now in Vocalocity, he's in Overboard sometimes when they have gigs, and is generally like a traveling drum kit as a person. He's really good, and the only track that we heard from them so far at that point, like, he didn't sound as special as he was, for example, and people just weren't used to how contemporary a cappella could sound in a recorded situation. So we were like, hey, we've done this before. We know what we're doing. Deke Sharon, Bill Hare, and Ed Boyer all say that we should do this. We should do this. And we brought them on. We recorded a whole bunch of lead vocals at our house, added some stuff to all their arrangements. And, geez, I think it was over the process of like 3 weeks that went from completely raw from what they gave us to a finished EP. We did some of the recording. We edited the whole thing. They were basically the first mixes we ever did for release. And me thinking that I knew what I was doing, but knowing that I really didn't, mastered the album, basically just made it loud because I didn't know any better. After that, getting that out kind of had things take off a little bit. We worked basically entirely through word of mouth for the first year or so. We did some posts on Facebook, on the RARB and CASA forums when that was still a thing. That's not any longer a thing. RIP. We picked up some clients locally in Massachusetts. Our first out-of-state client was the Northwestern X Factors, and some of the people in that group, in fact, the people who contacted us are now like our really good friends. It turned out that a lot of our early clients ended up being like people who we got along with, who are our friends, who we then made music with and happened to pay us, as opposed to like, we are rendering services, here is your product, which has never been what we want to do.
So when we had Alex Koutsoukas on, we talked a lot.
Oh, that's right.
We talked a little bit about, you know, your guys' style as a production company. And, you know, to me, it seemed like there's a lot of focus on the actual performance of the music, and, you know, the mixing and the effects, everything being important, but really the performance being the meat and bones of the thing. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, you know, how your experience directing music for your group in college and, you know, studying music in college, how that informs, you know, your recording style with Plaid today.
Mm-hmm. I think specifically because everything in contemporary a cappella recording is voices, your role as a recording engineer is like 90% performance and vocal coach and 10% technical. We tell people this all the time. I would much rather hear an emotive and engaging performance that's like universally 10 cents flat and sharp all over the place than something that's perfectly in tune and boring. Our style is basically pull the most emotion out of someone as possible, and if that means we have to do that at the expense of some technical stuff, fine. At this point in, let's say, the history of music technology, anyone can be in tune, anyone can be in time, anyone can be locked to a grid, and anyone's drums can be loud. The things that grab people are performance and emotional connection that you can't get just by being like, okay, your part here is, great, good job. So more often than not, when we stop people in the middle of performance to punch things in, it's not because they necessarily got a note wrong or their rhythm wasn't great. The things we're most concerned about are whether it felt good. Because I would rather, I think this just applies to most things in general, not just music. I would rather see, hear, touch, taste, feel something that, what did I miss? Smell. I said two, the same sense. I would rather experience through any one of my 5 sentences something that feels good rather than is technically sound. There are the rare groups that can do all of that at once. Like, yeah, sure, if you're in the Swingles, you're going to do another take if you were flat. But that's because every single time you sing, you're putting every single bit of emotion into it because you're, what are they, 7 now? Ostensibly like the 7 best English-speaking contemporary singers on the planet. But for the most part, you have to remember that while you can act and carry yourself as a professional, most of the people that we end up working with are technically amateur singers. And I would much rather hear a group of non-professionals carry themselves in a professional manner and sing with a professional level of commitment rather than a professional level of technical accuracy.
Speaking of amateur singers, I know that you guys do work with a lot of college groups. And one thing that I think about a cappella in its current state is that a lot of groups feel like there's a push or a need to put out music and constantly be making more recorded music, which is a great feat and a great thing to want to do. But I also think you have to be in a certain state or it has to be the right time for you to put out something or work on something. So I'm just wondering if you have any ideas on or advice on when a group should work on something or when they're ready to work on something.
Yeah, that's actually a great question that most groups don't ask themselves. Like, I think it's kind of a two-pronged question. One, are we ready to do X, Y, or Z? And simultaneously, why are we doing X, Y, or Z? And I think that's the more important question. Like, at this point, again, most people have ways of finding funding to make an album, either through like Indiegogo and just being like, hey, everybody's parents, give me $1, or doing like 2 private school gigs every weekend for 6 months to afford an entire album. Sidebar, if you're in Massachusetts, just do private school gigs. They love acapella. It's ridiculous. Everyone has the ability to do that. So the question that you next have to ask yourself is, why are we making this? What's the point? Is this just like, yeah, we make albums because we make albums? That's not an answer. There are plenty of groups for whom that is an okay answer, but for me, it's lacking in, well, purpose. And I think that's the more important question. It's not, when are you ready? It's, what are you getting ready for? For some groups, they make an active and conscious decision to be like, yeah, we're recording this because we record albums every 2 years as a memento. That is our purpose. It is to preserve, essentially in amber or in plastic or in digital, whatever, a picture of what the group was like for 2 years and what we did. And I hear a lot of people often being like, yearbook albums are dumb. Not if you're that committed to it, and the reason you want to do it is because it means something to you. Great. They may not be like award season competitive or trying to get on every compilation, and that's fine. But if you are trying to win every Cara and get on every compilation, then that's another purpose for why you're recording stuff. Or if you are like some of the groups we've worked with recently, when I say recently, this is more 4 years ago now, we're recording our first album in a very long time that we want to show like the acapella and greater musical community, hey, we exist, we're here, this is what we sound like now, we're different, we're big, we're cool, we're loud. So I think in a logistical sense, most groups are ready in that they can, but the question again that they need to ask themselves is why?
So speaking of why, there's a program out there that I think a lot of people don't know about called Melodyne, which, you know, is a pitch correction software that is used on, as far as I know, pretty much every piece of recorded a cappella today. And if you could explain what that is for the layman and why it's necessary, and, you know, talking with Coots as well, I get the sense that you guys use Melodyne in a very specific way.
Yeah.
So if you could just talk about it as a tool in general, that'd be great.
Sure. So before talking about Melodyne, I think I should just mention briefly Autotune, which is what everybody knows about. If you want to compare Autotune and Melodyne, Autotune is like a chainsaw for audio. Before it existed, doing whatever it did was nearly impossible and incredibly tedious, and it's a really, really good way to get something done really quickly and pretty much exactly the way you want it to, knowing that there will be some, like, either blips along the way or you have to try really, really hard to get it exactly the way you want it to sound. But it's easier than using, like, manual pitch correction via, like, a pitch shift plugin where you'd have to, for individual pieces of things, you have to plug in how many percents out of one half step you want to move individual pieces of notes, and that's just tedious. So Autotune makes that a little bit easier. If Autotune is a chainsaw, Melodyne is an entire toolbox full of different thickness and length of jigsaw and hacksaw blades. It lets you do lots of different things way more precisely and generally just as efficiently for what you're working on as a gigantic chainsaw. Autotune allows you to work on one voice on one track at once within another program, which is to say within Pro Tools, Logic, Cubase, whatever digital audio workstation or recording program you're using. Melodyne is a standalone program where you load all of your tracks in. You pull them out of your recording program by just making contiguous front-to-end files. You export them, you stick them in Melodyne, and it allows you to either work on one track at a time or listen to everything at once and move things around in context. It's much easier to move notes either pitch-wise or rhythm-wise, very, very tiny increments, and to a degree automatically move them closer, but not perfectly, intentionally, to like the center of a beat or the center of a pitch. It's sort of the same idea as Autotune. It's not as like intense as, say, like T-painting everything, though Melodyne can do that if you want. Use it as a tool, just like anything else. But it's less easy to ruin stuff, I guess, is the best way of putting it. And it's easier to more naturally edit things. The whole purpose of editing, in the way I and we look at it, is to only remove the most obvious flaws. You still want to leave some amount of imperfection and fluidity and obviously humanity to any performance, but you want to take away just enough that it isn't distracting. Leave it enough that people can kind of feel it viscerally and understand that, like, these are people and they're singing notes and they're moving around in space, as opposed to these are blobs stuck on a grid and these are lines. But you don't want to leave so much that people are actively distracted.
I was just interested to ask about, outside of your work in production and recording, you do quite a bit of instructing and judging from ICCA, SoJam, Boss, the Betsy Acapella Festival. So I'm just wondering, are there key pieces of advice or certain tidbits that you like to share with your students, or things that you have collected over the years that you think are important for people who are recording?
Yeah, it doesn't really differ all that much from what I tell people when we're recording, because the same things always apply. You're a group of singers performing. You all have to look and sound like you're singing the same song, and you all have to make it memorable. Those are the three things to remember. And the first one being, like, you're a group of singers. Duh. But some people have this weird way of forgetting that they're in a group context, but there are 12, 13, 14, 20, whatever, individual people on that stage who need to come together and sing the same thing, which then gets into the next stuff. I think the most important sub thing to that is making sure that it looks and sounds like people are singing the same song. I cannot tell you how many times I've been judging or just at a show and seen, like, oh man, let's see, someone singing like Unsteady by the Ex-Ambassadors, and some freshman baritone in the back is like smiling, like bopping along, singing his sad part with a giant smile on his face, like, I love singing so much. I'm like, do you know what song you're singing, dude? This song is literally about being so emotionally unsteady you feel like you're about to fall into a hole of your own making, and you're like, yay, life's great back here in baritone land. This is not meant to be a disparagement against baritones. I just had this image of, like, some dude just, like, floating around like a happy little teddy bear. What I like seeing is, if you look at any individual person in the group, even if you didn't hear or see the soloist, you would know generally what the song is about. And that's not necessarily like, oh yeah, if I look at the alto twos, I know that this song is about, like, someone's dad. Like, nah, that's a little too specific. But I want to know that, like, the soloist is being supported and can count on the fact that whatever performance they're giving, the entire group around them is giving the same thing. And that's, again, facial expressions, like I was saying. That's posture even, tone quality while you're singing. If you're the group that does it, choreography or movement or whatever we're going to call it. It can be any number of things, but it's just basically, I want to see performances that are cohesive and that aren't 12 individual people, but 12 individual people as part of a group. Definitely.
So we're reaching the end of the podcast here with Alex. We have one last question for you, and I know that you're the education coordinator at Boss, which by the time this comes out will have passed already, unfortunately. But but I'm interested in what excites you about the acapella scene currently, and what you're looking forward to for future trends of acapella music as somebody that's, passionate about education.
Something that I saw that's been happening that's very cool that was, I'm not going to talk about Boss yet. We'll get there. Something that was cool at the Betsy Acapella Festival that I've been staffing for the last 2 years is that the entire format is completely different than any other acapella festival I've ever been to, either attended or taught. The entire thing is singing focused. Like, the first part of Saturday is you break off into tiny groups. You pick up an arrangement that you have been sent previously, but there's always a chance that you didn't look at in your sight reading. You break off into little mix and match groups. You're all mixed up as attendees. And you just sing. Last year there was a whole bunch of cool stuff. I had a group of like 15 or 16 kids. Yeah, mostly kids. Some high school and some college, who I taught an arrangement of Greedy by Ariana Grande to in like an hour and a half, and then we sang it. Similar things have happened with other people, and I love seeing stuff like that where people take like the idea of an event that's been seen before and just completely flip up the format. Going back to Boss, since I became education coordinator last year, I've just wanted to get new stuff being taught. We didn't change up the format so much as add a specific featured feeling to education on Sunday. Last year, it was Deke Sharon. He was our featured educator and featured speaker. So we had this big, what is the future of acapella talk on Sunday that was supposed to be like an hour long and ended up being like 2.5 because it was interesting. This year we have Erin Hackle coming. She is the director of Mix and Lark over at UC as in University of Colorado, Denver. If you don't know who Mix and Lark are, you are mistaken. You should try again, for lack of a better term. So on Sunday, she's going to be teaching this open masterclass for soloists where we'll have people audition for her with a series of songs that they'll pick, and either they're going to be singing with their group as accompaniment, or we're having Tom Anderson play as an accompanist if they bring sheet music. Because in addition to writing every note ever in any arrangement, he's quite an accomplished pianist. So that's going to be a big, new, different thing. And as for the regular classes, I've tried to get new stuff in. I've been trying to give priorities to new classes, new instructors, new people, and new perspectives. So acapella festivals like Boss aren't just like, oh, cool, it's the same class with the same person that I've been going to for the last 2 years. Look at that schedule. I guess the competition is cool, but why do we want to go? Part of it is that I want to just get new ideas out into the community, and part of it is that as the coordinator of a festival, I kind of want people to go, as opposed to like, I don't know if it's worth it. So new stuff like that, things that haven't been taught before, things that haven't been talked about before, that's what I'm always looking for. We had a lot of cool stuff last year. We're going to have a lot of more cool stuff this year.
Awesome. So that about wraps everything up for today. Thank you, Alex, for coming in and podcasting
Thanks
with
for
us.
having me on.
Tune in next week for another episode of Head Voice.
This house doesn't